Okay, the sun is out. Let me see. Yeah, that works, man. All right. Man, we deep already. We are deep already. Good morning. Good morning. Don't forget, add the books to your Amazon cart and check out. Yo, we deep already. Peace to the chat. Peace to the chat. Tika in the building. Yeah. Let's go. So we getting ready to just blast right off, kind of almost like where we left off yesterday. So I don't know if y'all seen where we left off. Yeah, Nefer NeferLand. Man, I need this book. Oh, here we go. All right, so the children, y'all know, y'all know how to go, man. The children, y'all know how I go by now, man. The children, you know, they're not exactly playing fair. The children don't be playing fair, so before we went into Nefer NeferLand, right? Before we took the journey into Nefer NeferLand, right? This is where we left off. Nitric oxide, fixed equation, VO2Max, the breath, the diaphragm, the intercostals, right? This is why I don't like using the black marker, because the black marker, I got to do like a lat, just like a lat routine. Yo, it's like some type of lat routine trying to erase this black marker. I'm telling you, this is an exercise routine. My mic good? Oh yeah, okay. Mic is right. My mic sounds nice. Check one. No. All right, so in Melanin vs. Diabetes, book 2, right? Now, Tika, go ahead and tell them what I'm getting ready to say. Don't forget, add the book to your Amazon cart and check out. Right? But if you don't have this book, Melanin vs. Diabetes, book 2, you know what to do, right? Now, in this book, we play with a lot of numbers, just to help you to visualize. Oh man, gotta get my yeah. Yeah. So let that happen right there. Let that happen. Add a pinch of that. Yep. Okay. That's steaming. That'll burn my lips off. Ooh. Fogging up my glasses. Right? It'll burn your lips off if you drink it too hot, but it's never too hot for you to inhale. Right? Start getting those aromas flowing. Anyway, but we go through a lot of numbers to start the visualization process, right? Which is the main reason why, like with the prayer, right? We have 2 videos, right? One video is so you can visualize the prayer, right? To help with memorization, right? But then the next thing is so you can see what you're actually supposed to be doing, right? Toe raises, calf raises, squats, push-ups, jumping jack, get a whole complete full body workout, circulation, and get some breath work in, right? Get some breath work in. Now, you can work out like a madman as much as you want, but in order to really build the breath, right? Hold on, I gotta come back to this. Right? In order to really build the breath, you have to rewire your muscle mechanics, right? You have to rewire your muscle mechanics. So your muscle mechanics is your brain, spine, nerve, muscle connection. Brain, spine, nerve, muscle connection, right? How your body executes a program, right? So we back to the algorithm, right? But how your body executes a program. And when we are, here in Nefer NeferLand, right? Here in Nefer NeferLand, and I thought it deserved its own video title, like its own genre of YouTubes. I don't know if we're going to do more than just this, this video or this class or whatever the case may be. It might, you know how we do, it might turn into its own book series. Who knows? But I felt that we needed to pay some reverence, right? Some respect, right? We needed to put some respect on the concept, right? Because it is the primary. It is the primary. It is the primary in terms of your being, right? So like we measure time in seconds, right? So God will be the first, and then your heartbeat is the second. God is the first cause, your heartbeat is the second, right? So God causes life, right? And how does God do that, right? How does God? Nature, right? We can go to Kemet, we can go to the Bible. It's really no different, right? It's really no different, right? We're talking about the breath, right? We're talking about the breath. When you go through the Bible, right? Man is a hybrid, right? When you go through the Bible, as well as the Kemetic texts, they don't differ. They both agree. Man is a hybrid, right? So I know Dr. Sebi said no hybrids, but listen, Dr. Sebi got to relax. Dr. Sebi meant well, but man himself is a hybrid. That thing is hot, right? So the waters kind of create the fish, the earth creates the animals, right? But man is made from the dust of the ground, right? From the dust of the ground, and then what? And then God blows the breath of life, right? Into his nostrils, right? Into his nostrils, right? Nostrils, windpipe, heart, right? Nostrils, windpipe, heartbeat. Nostrils, windpipe, heartbeat, right? Same thing in Kemet. In Kemet, they have man being created on clay, right? The soul of Osiris, right? Kanun or Bain-Jet is molding the clay. And then you have one of the sisters, right? The Agdo, the Kamenu, holding the Ankh. The Ankh representing the breath of life to the nostrils of the newly molded earth, right? You know, we got books to discuss it. You know, we have books to discuss it, right? The PhD book, Power of Hydrogen, right? Power of Hydrogen, the PhD book, right? PhD, Power of Hydrogen is divine. I'm almost certain it's this book. Okay, yeah. If we go gender and race, blah, blah, blah. Living soul, breath of life. The Adventures of Sanahat. The main character writes this to King Kepa Kara. Thou, the good God, Lord of both lands, love the Ra, favorite of Mentu, the Lord of Thebes. Oh, okay. No. Okay. The breath of life is important in Kemet just as in the Bible. I'm on page 4. Right? I'm on page 4. The Adventures of Sanahat. The main character writes this to the king Keper Kara. Thou, the good God, Lord of both lands, loved of Ra, favorite of Mentu, the Lord of Thebes and of Amen, Lord of thrones, Lord of the lands, of Sebek, Ra, Horus, Hathor, Atmu, and his fellow gods of Sapdu, Nephabu, Semsetu, Horus, Lord of the east, and of the royal Uraeus which rules on thy head, of the chief gods of the waters, of men, Horus of the desert, Urit, mistress of Punt, Nut, Harnet, Ra, all the gods of the land of Egypt and of the isles of the sea. May they give life and peace to thy nostril. May they load thee with their gifts. May they give thee eternity without end, everlastingness without bound. Right? The key phrase in there, peace to thy nostril. O thou who art beloved of Ra, of Horus, of Hathor, Mentu, Lord of Thebes, desires that thy august nostril should live forever. Still later, in another scene, the god king's children say, may the goddess Nub give life to thy nostril. May the mistress of the stars favor thee when thou sailest south and north. Right? This is page 4 from the PhD book. Right? And what we're talking about here is something this is y'all know the common theme here. They steal in the drip. There's no other way to there's no other way to package it. Right? When we talk about the science of the breath, and you look at all of these mystical YouTube channels, or you look at the fake channels, right? The fake channels, what I mean is you don't see a person, right? You just hear like an animated AI voice, right? And they're telling you some mystical foolishness. Like they already at work, bro. Listen, they already at work. They already hard at work trying to repackage the quote unquote underground discoveries of the pyramids now. That we looked at the other day. Shout out to Hotep Jesus. Hotep to Hotepistan, right? Put some respect on Hotepistan. But they already repackaging this discovery as some sort of homage to Hermes. There's a video floating around out there where they're going through some caves. And they're like, look at the green walls. The green is clearly a testament to Hermes. I'm like, ah. But now, it's a good thing that we've been doing what we've been doing. And I think that's probably why. That's probably the other reason why Hotep Jesus sent me the link in the first place. I mean, he keeps me in the loop. From time to time, he'll get me together, and he'll shoot me some. But I think the other thing is, now let me show y'all something real quick, because we got a lot of new people watching, and I'm not sure everybody saw when we did this. This is from some years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, something like that. Let me see here. Give me a second. What am I missing? What am I missing? Oh, I know what I'm supposed to do. I know what I'm supposed to do. There we go. Good thing I have my grocery shopping list. Don't leave home without it. Okay, I think hold on. I think we had something. I thought we had something. It's not in here. I don't know where it is. Let's see something. Ah, here we go. It is in here. It is in here. Y'all see what I'm showing y'all? Let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. So there was a process. There was a process of whitewashing that went on. There was a process of whitewashing that went on. Right? So there was a so before they get too out of hand with this thing, right? We got to pump some brakes real quick. There's a process of whitewashing that went on, and it's not just right because most of us we know the name Osiris, right? That's the name most people know. You know, and even those of us that have, you know, learned the name Asar, and did a little bit more study and learned the name Usir, right? Which is the actual, you know, most people never really, they never really go any further than that, right? As far as they're concerned, Osiris is just a mispronunciation or a misreading of the name Asar or Usir, right? It's just the way the Greek people, you know, they read the glyphs or they translated and, you know, boom. So they got Osiris and that was that. That is absolutely incorrect, right? That is absolutely incorrect, regardless of who you got that from. That is incorrect. Osiris not only is the Greek name, right, but it's not a mistake. That's the thing that I'm saying is incorrect. They didn't just incorrectly pronounce or incorrectly translate the glyphs or the ancient texts. What they were doing was recreating something in the image and likeness of, right? They were making a Greek version, right? And what happened was it didn't work out. It just didn't work. It just didn't work. Because remember, Egypt became, you know, Egypt is a Greek place. For all extents and purposes, Egypt is a Greek place, right? And at a certain point in time, Egypt is the center of Greek culture. Egypt is the center of Greek culture. So a lot of times there are stories about, Greco-Roman scholars that had to travel to Egypt to get educated. That's kind of true, but not really. It was right there, right? Once Alexander got handed the keys, or strong arm, he Suge Knighted, he big, or we can replace Suge Knight with Big U now, right? He extorted the keys to the kingdom, right? That was that. Egypt became, even the creation of the term, the word Egypt, right? That's a Greek thing. That's a Greco-Roman. So the remnant, the priesthood, right? Whether people were saying Osiris or not, it was still attached to Kemet. It was still attached to the perfect black who was green, right? So it had to be further watered down and whitewashed. It had to be further watered down and whitewashed. And so eventually what they do is they merge Jehudi and Asar, Wusir, they merge them into one character whose name starts off as Osiris, but later on is just this Greco-Roman, all-encompassing God of eternity and wisdom and all the above. Hermes, and there's a lot of fanciful, but we have to pump the brakes on that, right? So we can't even let them get out the gate with the radar and the scientific equipment and start flashing, radar images and scientific findings, and then superimposing mythological gobbledygook on the scientific findings, because that's going to confuse people, right? So yeah, so we can't even allow that to begin to happen, right? But that is an absolute fact, right? That is an absolute fact of what happened. And of course, Anubis goes along for the ride. Anubis goes along for the ride. So that's a whole entire rabbit hole that we're not going to go down that rabbit hole right now. But that's a thing, and they didn't stop. They didn't stop, right? they still kind of at it, right? So anyway, oh man. Okay, well, I know where we was at in my mind. Anyway. So before I got sidetracked and went on my little quick rant, right? The reason why I got sidetracked into that is because the science of the breath, right? The idea of yoga that's attributed to India, right? All of these different things have their roots, right, in Kemet. Kemet gave the world civilization. It's very hard for a lot of us to accept that. So the idea of the Semitawi, right, or Smitawi, it has layers of, like everything else, it has layers of meaning, right? So on a surface level, it's upper and lower Kemet. But as you go a little bit deeper into the concept, it is the flesh and the spirit. The flesh and the spirit. And I think the Bible puts a nice exclamation point on it when it says God breathed the breath of life into man and man became a living soul. It's just so many texts like we were going through that have been left out, right? That have been left out. So this is where we were going in the PhD book, right? From page 4, right? We went through a couple of passages, right, from the Adventures of Sanahat. And then we have, flip to page 5, we have Egyptian Tales, first series, 4th to the 12th dynasty, translated from the Papyri, 2nd edition by William Flinders Peachtree in 1899. Pure, pure is the Osiris, great of the 5, master of seats. Sishu. The perfume opens your mouth. It is the saliva of Horus. The perfume, it is the saliva of Horus, the perfume. It is what makes firm the heart of the 2 lords, the perfume. The tomb of Petosiris Lefebvre, Gustave Le Tombe Petosiris, 1924, volume 1, page 131. The text in the funeral chamber, speech of Isis. Isis saith, I have come to be a protector unto thee. I waft unto thee air for thy nostrils, and the north wind which come forth from God, Tem, unto thy nose. I have made whole for thee thy windpipe. I make thee to live like a god. Thine enemies fall under thy feet. I have made the word to be true before Nut, and thou art mighty before the gods. Opening of mouth was also opening of the nose. The nose is what takes in genetic material via HGT, horizontal gene transfer, for the folks all the way in the back. In fact, Egyptian physicians were interested in the anatomy of the nose. Though they didn't understand the olfactive processes, they did know that the internal chambers played a part. The Egyptian word for nose is find, right? So the ancient Egyptian, now we know anytime we read the term ancient Egyptian, that means Kemet, because there's no such thing as ancient Egypt, right? From the Edward Smith surgical papyrus, we know that the area at the very back of the internal nose where the cribriform plate is located was called Shatit and find. This has been translated as the inner chamber of the nose. Shatit is a word only used in religious context, specifically in religious architecture, and means the dwelling place of the gods. So a better translation of Shatit and find would be the nasal sanctuary, or the nose is the dwelling place of the gods, right? So now you can take that, go crazy, go down the rabbit hole, right? And say to yourself, wait a minute. So is that why they were specifically etching off the noses and blowing off the noses and desecrating the noses? Because they thought that they were attacking the gods, killing the gods, destroying the gods, right? That conversation we will not have right now. You can go crazy with that, right? But the point is that the breath from the earliest times in Kemet, the breath was seen as sacred, right? The breath was seen as sacred. And so the sacred understanding of the breath, the science of the breath, traveled, right? Traveled. And so we have yoga and things like that are now sourced back to us from India. We have different forms of martial arts that are now sourced back to us from Asia, right? But the oldest text and work on the spiritual sense, the spiritual idea of the breath and it as the source of life comes directly to us from Kemet, right? So in our Nefer NeferLand Chronicles, right, that is the connection we'll be making. And yesterday we started with dandruff and dementia. Dandruff and dementia. And the key is, and it's not just necessarily dementia, because dementia and Alzheimer's, right? Dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all of these things have hypoxia in common, right? Along with almost all the other conditions we were discussing. Congestive heart failure, you go down the list, right? Hypoxia and or ischemia, right? That might as well be the big three. We might as well hit up Ice Cube. Hypoxia, hypercapnia, ischemia. Big three, right? So, going back to Melanin vs. Diabetes, book 2, what we were doing here, like I said, was putting some numbers out there to help you be able to visualize the totality of what is going on, right? To create that vision. And this is the reason why when we do the push-ups, right, the goal is to get to the 60 in 60 seconds, right? For ladies, it's 40 in 60 seconds. That's your goal, right? Because when you do push-ups, 60 push-ups in 60 seconds, right? It becomes more than strength training. It becomes more than an isometric, a calisthenic, right? It becomes more than a calisthenic or resistance training or building muscle, right? Once we add a timer to it, it now becomes a cardiovascular exercise. This is Melanin vs. Diabetes, book 2. I don't know if I missed the timeliness of your question, right? But the book we were just reading out of, while I was going through the ancient references to the nose and the nostril, is the PhD book, right? The power of hydrogen is divine. PhD, right? So I'm not sure if I missed the timing of your question, right? But, or you might have tuned in a few minutes late. It's all good. We started a few minutes early. Plus yesterday we went in the afternoon and then we doubling back. Normally, you know, we don't go back to back days. But I felt like I stopped the video early yesterday, right? Wrestling with my babies. Right? And I didn't want to be in and out on the next part of what I was getting ready to go into. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna just stop the video here. Whoop, and we'll just go, you know, we'll start fresh in the morning with a separate video. right? We'll just do this in a separate space and maybe even create a whole separate universe for this, for the context of the information to live in. Because as you see, we're in Melanin vs. Diabetes book 2, right? We're talking about the 60 and 60. The 60 and 60 been our thing since before we had the very first book on Amazon, right? So that's the whole purpose of, like I was saying anyway, to pick back up, of the 60 and 60, because you make it a cardiovascular, you make it a respiratory routine. You begin to work the diaphragm and the intercostals when you're now pushing yourself, right? Pushing yourself to get 60 push-ups in 60 seconds, right? Because it's largely the breath that's going to be able to carry you. But I want to find the page real quick where we kind of play with some of these numbers. And if you have these books, feel free to open up your book as I'm flipping through my book, right? So we could be on the same page, Okay, somewhere in here.
Myron! Myron!
What?
What are you doing? What you doing?
What you talking about? What am I doing?
You reading them nasty books again, right, Myron?
Everybody read no nasty books, man. You scared the hell out of me. What you talking about, man? Well, I ain't did that in about 2 weeks.
You called yesterday too. What you reading? What you reading?
You scared the goddamn book, man. Dr. EnQi. I went on Amazon and got 3 Dr. EnQi books because I'm reading about melatonin and biochemistry. Biochemistry.
What is, Myron, that's not even a, first of all, it's not melatonin and whatever it is that you just said. It's melanin and biochemistry. You can't even pronounce.
That's my favorite clip. Y'all know I got like clips from all kinds of comedians on social media, but that's probably my favorite. That's probably my favorite. That one, and then the one I did with Ha Davis with the I need to bring that back out with the blue magic, like me and him as Denzel in Cuba. All right, hold on. There's so much stuff in this book, particularly with dealing with the neurochemistry and the breath and okay. So go to page 52 if you have the book. If you don't, go get this book, right? So we give an estimate, right, for $270 million. Wait a minute, that can't be right. Oh, no, that's correct. 270 million $25 trillion cells, 270 million hemoglobin units, right? And then obviously, right, 60,000 miles every 60 seconds, right? 60,000 miles every 60 seconds. $60,000 every 60 seconds. $120,000 heartbeats, right? 24,000 breaths. 144 gallons of oxygen or O2, right? And then we can go even crazier, right? Each breath is what? I think 7,000 photons, something like that, right? But just to get an idea, right? And then, of course, also, we might as well add to it your body weight of ATP, right? So just to get an idea, yeah, maybe that's a little bit better. Let me get my black self out of there because I absorb light. Get my black self out of the way, right? But just to start to create the idea, right? You kind of need some numbers to understand the immense scope of what the respiratory system needs to do, right? What the respiratory system needs to do as the foundation of your everything in your body, the foundation of your life. But also, when you start to get into these numbers, understand that it's a lot simpler, right? It's a lot simpler to communicate complex ideas like this with story. Anthropomorphize, communicated in a story, because when it comes to these numbers, there's no such thing as an absolute. There's no such thing as correct, right? You can only have averages or ranges because each person's body is different, right? There's no like me and LeBron James don't breathe the same amount of breaths per day. We don't breathe the same amount of oxygen. We don't exhale the same amount of carbon dioxide. You and your daughter or your son, you don't breathe the same. Like, so these are averages taking over X amount of people, right? At X body weight, X height, right? X body weight, X height, right? And these models are necessary for modern medicine to progress, but sometimes if you don't fit the model, you fall to the wayside with, treatments and practices, and some of those even become the statistical anomalies that we saw yesterday. The neurosurgeon, contributed to the reason why he quit being a neurosurgeon, because there were just so many things he couldn't explain. Mind you, these things are simply explained in comedic science, right? Simply explained, even if you view modern science with comedic science in your back pocket, it will expand your view of modern science to where you see some of these people going crazy, literally, to the point where they're walking away from $1 million careers. They're walking away from $1 million careers because it's too much on them. The mixture of guilt, the unknowing, it's pressing. It's pressing. He almost sounded like a retired hitman or a retired heroin dealer or something yesterday, right? If you didn't see the video yesterday, we had a video we were kind of reacting to called "I'm an MIT educated neurosurgeon who quit my job and now I'm like traveling in the mountains," or something to that effect. And he was telling his story, right? And the reason why he quit is the medicine and the surgery wasn't healing folks, at least not up to his personal standard that he's, what he thought he signed up for, right? But then B, there were too many unexplained anomalies that he couldn't, like people were getting better before they went into surgery. And then there were other people that got perfect surgeries, but didn't get better. There were people that got surgeries that got better. It just was like so all the way across the board. He felt like what he was doing was meaningless, right? I wish I could talk to him directly and be like, no, you just need more information. And then you need to go back into your field, right? We need people with that heart and that mindset actually in the hospitals. We don't need those people that are empathetic. They literally feel for the patients to say, you know what, I quit. This ain't it. I gotta, because at that point they're leaving us with nothing but zombie robot, surgeons that just want to run up their, their paychecks, right? They're just running up a tab. But the differences that we have in anatomy is why he has some of the result, the stuff that he can't explain. And this is why I'm championing. I think that's how, championing. Yeah, I think that's how you pronounce that. Championing RFK. Here's why I'm championing RFK, because he put that thing on wax. He put that on wax and then he stood on business. He said, hold up, everybody's different. We need to make a medical system where, we treat people based on their differences. Some people need more shots than others. Some people need less shots. Some people need more medicine, more surgery, less medicine, less surgery, more vitamins, less vitamins. We need to start realizing that people are different. And the crazy thing is, let me say this, because this thing with RFK gets crazier and crazier the more you look at it. All of Trump's opposition, all of the Kamala Biden folks were championing the idea. Listen to this. They were championing the idea of external differences, right? That was the whole thing. Transgender, transhuman, black, white, gay, straight, other types of, yeah. Now, when RFK goes one step forward in a different direction and goes, wait a minute, listen, yeah, we are all different. We do need to be accepted for our differences. And what I'm saying is our medicine, our medical procedures, our surgeries, right? All of these things should reflect that. All of these things should reflect that. The world goes crazy. The world goes crazy. It says, oh, he's a danger to people and blah, 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 blah. No, it's just people don't know when they're being used by the Most High for something that they can't, you don't know. God uses everybody, put people in places, even your ops may be an obstacle put in your way for your personal growth and development. You just have no idea how things play out over time, right? But the one thing we know for sure is that as is, the medical system can't stand, right? And this is the reason why, when we make it an international conversation, the conversation has more merit, more standing, because if we critique the United States healthcare system, right? Well, the popular ideas of alternatives, right, is grass is always greener syndrome, right? It's fanciful because we've just had what we've had and that's all we know. But if we expand the conversation, Canada, France, and other countries, well, most of these other ideas have already been tried and, they're failing differently than we are, right? So our system's failing. And then the other ideas, the other systems are failing in different ways, right? And so when you look at what's missing from the various systems, it's because they're not predicated on, it's like we have this comedic crop. We have a comedic crop of information, and different nations and peoples have picked from the crop, right? And they've created a whole thing based on a small slither of the crop, right? And it's not going to improve until we put the information all back together again, and then step out on the whole. And that was literally always supposed to be the idea of holistic, right? Holistic. Nothing is supposed to be excluded from holistic, but our divisiveness got the best of us. Because there's a time period where if you sat amongst the Sabi followers, holistic was herbs. Holistic was herbs with a vegan diet. Vegan and herbs was holistic. Boop. If you sat amongst the followers of Dr. Africa, holistic was melanin, vitamins, and minerals, right? Drew Pookum at one time, that was her point of view. That was holistic. Melanin, vitamins, minerals. In fact, I think her book, which at one point in time was like $2,000, melanin, vitamins, A to Z, or something to that effect. She wrote a book on melanin and vitamins and minerals, right? When the book first came out, it was like 10, 20 bucks. Something like mine, 20 bucks, maybe 25, I don't know, somewhere in that range. Then they went out of print. And when they went out of print, it was like the earth stopped spinning. People went crazy looking for that book. So the prices shot up to like $2,000. And then I think she put them back in print and the price dropped back down. But if you would have sat amongst maybe some, Eastern philosophy students, right? Holistic would have been, like yoga practices and breathing practices, right? With more like an Ayurvedic kind of approach. And herbs is the one thing that is everywhere, right? So with the Ayurvedic, the yoga approach, there's herbs, a whole pantheon, right? With the martial arts, right? And martial arts is such a poor description, but that's what we got. The martial arts, because all of the martial arts were not martial, right? Which is how the MMA people have been able to destroy most of the sanctity and the reverence that's supposed to be placed on the martial arts, because it's really spiritual science, right? So the development and story and history of martial arts is that you have monks, priests, right? Spiritualists that were doing their thing and they were ignoring their physical health. So Damo came from India, right? That's the popular story. Some stories have him coming from Moorish origins, right? But he came up through India, Africa, less important. But Damo came and he taught the priests, the spiritualists, how to exercise. And once he taught them how to build up their body, then he taught them how to defend themselves, because what they were doing was so important to the world. They were the keepers of specific spiritual and living sciences that went back to the beginning of time. Now, whether you believe this or not, I'm not here to dispute that or debate that with you. I'm just telling you what the legend is. I'm telling you the history, right? Because they were keepers of ancient, invaluable wisdom, they needed to be able to defend themselves, because raiders, mercenaries, savages, nomads were coming through and they were violating the priests, the spiritualists, they were violating the priesthood. They had come through, steal up stuff, kill up, they would just do whatever, steal the books, the knowledge. They couldn't defend themselves because they had devoted their lives strictly towards an aesthetic type of living, so they were like skinny, looking like a lot of the pure vegans from the 90s and the early 2000s, before I got into the vegan, before my voice went global around the world and I started telling, oh, vegan does not mean you got open toe sandals on with dirty toenails and smelling like Egyptian musk and frankincense. Like, that's not that. Those things, that doesn't have to be the culture. You don't have to be like a feminine form of Jesus to be plant-based, right? And that's why I think the analogy and the references of like the gorillas and the elephants and things like that made such an impact, because people realized you could pack on muscle and size and things like that and still be vegan. You could still be masculine. You could still be manly, because we had the popular idea of like boxers, boxer earns money so that way he can eat steak, because steak builds up his, and all of this kind of stuff. So anyway, the science of the breath, right? That has always been the unifying thing about spirit, and even the word spirit. The word spirit literally means breath. Breath means spirit, right? When you're talking about breathing in, inhale, that is inspiration. Breathing in is inspiration, right? Breathing in is inspiration. Remember, we have two languages. We have two languages that make up English, right? We have French and we have German, right? The German is for the commoners. The French is for the royalty. And that goes back to all the way back to Kemet as well, right? Because the Germans were removed from Kemet. So they always kind of hated Africa and Egypt, right? They weren't allowed the quote unquote blessings of Kemet, right? Where the Romans held that as their, like literally, their fortunes are built on what they took from the Greeks. And the Greeks, through Alexander, got handed the keys to Kemet, right? So the fortunes of the world is built on the knowledge from Kemet, right? It starts right there. It starts right there. The Roman church, and then the Roman church sanctions this, that, and the other, and it just goes, it becomes a history class, and that's not my bag, right? We got to go to Hotep Jesus page for history lessons, right? But the French comes from the Latin and the North African languages, right? The Latin and the North African languages, right? Etruscan and some of those other things. That's where you get the French language from, right? And French and German makes up English, right? We think English comes from England, right? But England has no language, right? It is a mix of French and German, right? German being the commoners, the French or the Latin being the holy language, right? Which is the language still of, the popes, and they doing their thing, right? So Latin is, the language of the Vatican City. And then also, it's supposed to be a dead language, right? Just like the Metal Ledger is supposed to be a dead language, but these languages are far from dead, right? Because Latin, French, Spanish, the Romance languages, right? But Latin specifically is in your law books, right? It's in your law books, and then it's also in the anatomy. So these are also very powerful moves, right? Because when you frame the law, the basis of the law in Latin, when you frame the basis of the living body in Latin, it doesn't matter if people converse in this language or not. The language will always go on and live, right? This is why it's important. The Rough Ashlar book, the trigonometry book, the Legend of Wusia book, to have a base, a working knowledge, right? To be able to go back to. Because if everything we do etymology wise goes back to Latin, goes back to the Vatican, goes back to Rome, we in trouble, right? So that's why even with the Hebrew, it's important for us to establish all these things and go, okay, wait a minute. So there's no such thing as ancient Israel. There's no such thing as ancient Egypt. These things are created in the Bible. Created in the Bible by who? so now we go, oh, these are Kemetic. This is Kemetic. Even the language, we know Akhenaten and what they were doing. Okay, boom. Now we can start piecing together the missing parts of the story to give us a much more wider view, wider perspective. It doesn't mean that we discard any of the advancements or modern science or anything like that. It just means that we have a much wider perspective, right? Because that's what we need. The most important thing in the world to life is the thing that we value the least. Our breath. Save your breath. When we say save your breath, that's an insult. We violating somebody. We disrespecting somebody when we say save your breath. We shouldn't view it that way. Because literally, that's what a healer is trying to do. A true healer is literally trying to save your breath. Right? When you look at some of the long-lived animals, like the tortoises and some of these animals, they began to view human health in a different way. Because they look at some of these animals and they go, oh, wow, they're able to live so long because their breathing pattern is different. Because their breathing pattern is different, they're having less wear and tear on the heart. Less wear and tear on the heart, less wear and tear on the muscles and the organs. Let's look over at the human body again. Let's relook at the same information that we've already had, right? And the information that we already had is a healthy heart in a healthy adult, 60 beats per minute. 1 beat per second, right? Every second. Woo. Right? 60 in 60. A healthy heart is doing push-ups. What? At 60 in 60. A healthy heart is doing its own push-ups. 60 and 60, right? That was my own insight. I'm like, oh, okay, so that's what I need to come with the, oh, that's that. That's how we realign the heart back to the, yeah, we just do the push-up 60 and 60. That's where I came up. But when I went through the, I think when I first noticed it, right, because I had different experiences with it. But I think when I went through NASM for the very first time, right? And let's see.
Myron! Myron! What are you doing? What you doing?
What you talking about? What am I doing?
You reading them nasty books again, right, Myron?
Everybody reading those nasty books, man. You scared the hell out of me. What you talking about, man? Wait, I ain't did that in about 2 weeks.
You called yesterday 2 weeks. What you reading?
You scared the goddamn book, man. Dr. EnQi. I went on Amazon and got 3 Dr. EnQi books because I'm reading about melatonin and biochemistry.
What is, Myron, that's not even a, first of all, it's not melatonin and whatever it is that you just said. It's melanin and biochemistry. You can't even pronounce the word, so how you reading? How you reading, Myron?
I'm not looking at the pictures. I got the books right here. I'm looking at the pictures. You know, ain't nothing nasty about this. So what are you talking about? I got all the books right here. What are you talking about?
Myron, you don't even know how to read. Every time we get mail, you bring it to me. You think I don't know that?
I went to I got hooked on Phoenix. Now, what you talking about? I was hooked on Phoenix, so I know how to read.
As a when? Because first of all, hooked on phonics, I believe it's for kids. There's no such thing as hooked on Phoenix. And if I recall, you're the same person that thought reindeer was pronounced reinder, and you're the same person that thought pigeon was pronounced piggion. So it makes sense that you went to hooked on Phoenix.
Man, such a dumbass.
No,
man.
you
always trying to say somebody can't read. I know exactly what I'm talking about, man. I'm reading the books. I got the book. I got the goddamn receipt right here. I got the goddamn receipt right here for the books. What you talking about?
Well, you need to return them for somebody who know how to read them. And I still don't. It's probably all type of stuff in the inside of the books, Myron. That's how sneaky you are. Give me the books. Give me the books, Myron.
Hell no.
Give me the books, Myron.
Amazon.
Give me the books, Myron.
I'm not giving you none. I got these books on Amazon. I'm not giving you the books. Ain't that nothing?
Okay. You busting in on me, bro. What are you doing?
Not the apple.
No, you trying to blackmail me for my apples on my live stream? Get out of here, bro.
He think cause y'all watching, I'ma say yes.
Yo. But anyway, I still have my NASM textbook. I still have my NASM textbook from when I first went through the NASM course, whenever that was. Yeah. Look, I got my index card still in here trying to memorize all this stuff. Notes, printouts. Oh my God, look at this. Yo, look at this. Now he trying to come in here and bully me for my... I got some delicious apples on my bed. Wow. Look at this. I done struck gold. Hold on. Chase! Look at this. I got his drawings in here. Him and Caleb. I got him and Caleb drawings in this book when they was little kids, when they was babies. Goku and Ninja Turtles. And I know which ones is his and which ones is Caleb's. Anyway, yeah, now he's not answering. But yep, I got my little my index cards in here. But anyway, when I went through this book, when I went through the class, the course rather, it hit me a different way than most of the other people just going through the course to get their personal trainer certification, right? Because I had, a martial art background and, Eastern philosophy, Kemetic philosophy, just different. My mind was expanded. So going through the course, when I see that they were relating, right, a couple of key pieces, right, heart rate with breath, right, heart rate with breath. And then there were charts that we needed to learn, which was the heartbeats per minute for particular age groups, right? So they were basically directly categorizing how old you were based on your heartbeat, right? Because one of the things you learn, and I don't know, they probably changed it over the last 10, 20 years or so, but one of the things you learn is, probably 15 years, something, I don't know. But I'm sure they've changed it in the last 10 or 15 years. But one of the things you learn to be a safe personal trainer, right, is that everybody, you want to get people up to their maximum heart rate for a good workout, right? But that maximum heart rate is different for everybody, right? So 20 years old, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, you have a different maximum heart rate, right? Then if you have high blood pressure, diabetes, blah, 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 all of these things change what a safe maximum exertion, like how we have in our minds, at least back in the days we did, the drill sergeant, like the Army drill sergeant as a personal trainer. Give me 10 more. I can't. Give me 5 more. I can't. And they pushing you to your. Well, that limit to push a person to is different, right? So anyway, what stuck in my mind was, like the relationship of the heartbeat to longevity to life, beats per minute, right? And then obviously your systolic and diastolic, and how the number 120 kept popping up in certain places, right? Because 120 is the thing I heard around the neighborhood, right? 120, right? And then you find out 120 is the maximum amount of electrons an atom can carry, 120 in your blood sugar, your A1C number, your high blood pressure number, like 120,000 miles of vessels for your lymphatic system, right? So just stuff stuck differently in my mind because of all the other things that was in there. So eventually, as I begin to take the study of the body and the health stuff more seriously, the science part stuck, but the reverence, the divine part stuck as well, because again, if we go back to Kim or we go back to the Bible, whichever you're more comfortable with, it's the same, right? The animals come from the earth, the fish from the water, the birds from the air, right? But people, man, is a hybrid between the earth and the gods, the divine, right? And that relationship is Tefnut, Nut, Geb, Shu, right? Most specifically and easy to see is Geb, the earth, the iron, the magnetism, and Shu, light and breath, right? But Tefnut and Nut is where you add the water and even the plasma in, and you get, you can go through cycles, the weather cycles even, right? In the stories, right? In the stories, right? Because you have Geb and Nut, right? You have Shu and Tefnut, Geb and Nut, right? And then you have Geb and his wife going through it, right? Geb and his wife going through it. And we talk about this in the book. So if you probably, for the most of y'all, some of y'all got all some of the people that y'all see in the chat, y'all think they playing, but they're not playing. They have the books before I do. And they be sending me text messages like, look at my book collection. I be hating. It take me longer as an author to save a few bucks to get the book. You know what I'm saying? So sometimes it take 2, 3, 4 weeks for me to get the book, where they could just order that bad boy at Amazon. 2 days is at their house, right? So I'll be hating sometimes, but this is in the books, right? Just an example of teaching through story, right? So you have Shu and Tefnut or Tefnut, right? And then you have Geb and Nut, right? Sisters and brothers and husband and wife and twins, right? But like all husband and wives, just like sisters and brothers, right? They fight, right? And when a wife fights with her husband, what does she do? She goes back to her parents' house, right? She goes back to her parents' house. And after she stays with her parents, for X amount of time, a day, a month, a year, whatever, she makes back up with her husband, and then she goes back to her husband, right? And that's the relationship, right? And so you look at Geb being the earth and Nut being the water, right? When Geb and Nut fall out, the water evaporates. The water evaporates back up into the clouds. So Nut goes back. She leaves Geb and goes back to Shu and Tefnut. And then when she makes up with Geb, you have rain, snow, etc. She comes back down to Geb, right? Simple story to explain the water cycles, right? So whether you look at a simplification of the story, the earth and God breathing the breath of life, that is the central feature of spirituality. And as we move through all of the conditions, right? And this is kind of why I needed to highlight it and do like something separate. I know y'all like EnQi, you wilding with the Nefer NeferLand thing, but listen, you can take the boy out the city, but not the city out the boy, right? So y'all know I'm like half crazy. Charlemagne says that the craziest people in the world come from the Bronx and Florida. So don't judge me. If you do judge me that way, right? But yeah, I felt like it needed to have its own space, right? Because you're going to notice it in every condition, right? Even the earliest psychiatric drugs was just based on blood flow, vasoconstrictors, vasodilators, right? Because that was the idea. If the brain was doing too much, we give the patient vasoconstrictors, cut down the blood flow to the brain, and that should quiet the activity in the brain down, hence, mild down the symptoms, right? If there's not enough activity in the brain somewhere, vasodilator, open up blood flow to the brain, more blood, more activity. At least in theory, that's how it was supposed to work, right? But all of these conditions, right, starting with diabetes, which is the front piece, that's the centerpiece of everything that, melanin versus diabetes, the ministry and the movement, right? Well, that's why people are getting their feet and their hands and body parts cut off, right? On the one hand, we go, oh yeah, well, I thought it was infection and gangrene and woo woo woo. Yeah, it's infection and gangrene. And the reason why it has to be cut off is because it can't be fixed, because you can't get blood in there. You can't get oxygen in there, right? So it's really like trying to separate the chicken from the egg. The focus is on the infection side, but the infection side comes from the lack of blood flow and lack of oxygen. So if there's blood flow, that means there's going to be oxygen. If there's blood flow and oxygen, there's no unfixable infection setting in to rot the tissues. The tissues only begin to rot, right, when you can't get the oxygen in. So no matter what it is that we look at, right, the oxygen is the key piece. Otto Warburg got his Nobel Prize for cancer for figuring out the respiratory process of cancer cells, right? Figuring out the respiratory process of cancer cells, right? Having all this information in my mind is what made me take a look at the story of Osiris and Set, which just reminded me of how they're trying to already package and plagiarize the underground Giza findings. They're like, oh no, the underground Giza findings is largely based on the story of Hermes and Set. And I said to myself, I said, wait, what? I had to pause the video and rewind that back like I didn't hear what I thought I heard. I said, there's no Hermes and Set stuff. What is the what? I said, nah, this is crazy. But having all this stuff in my mind is what made me look differently at, because if we don't go down in history for anything else, we don't go down in history for finding the root causes of diabetes and cancer in the story of Wusia, right? And it starts with the legend having his blood as wine, right? Fermented fruit sugar. And, I didn't have anything scientifically to substantiate it until because some bodybuilders, you learn a lot from bodybuilders if you know what you're looking for, right? But it wasn't because in the bodybuilding universe, they always say, oh, well, black folks are blessed with genetics and blah, blah, blah. And that's that. Because they bodybuilders, they didn't really go any further than what they needed to. So that was their internal bodybuilder conversation throughout the 80s or whatever, talking about Lee Haney and Ronnie Coleman and some of these other guys. But what they were talking about specifically was the disproportionate amount of type 2B fast twitch muscle, right? Type 2B fast twitch muscle. And so I instantly was able to make the connection with the perfect black, right? And one of the differences in our anatomy being having, more type 2B fast twitch muscle, right? And the thing with type 2B fast twitch muscle is, it's the white meat, right? But it's the fermentation muscles, right? It's the glycolysis muscles. It doesn't use oxygen for respiration, just like cancer cells, right? Just like cancer cells. So for me, it was a aha moment, right? Like the aha problems. There was an aha moment. Like, oh, this is the reason why black folks have higher cancer rates. It's not necessarily a direct genetic thing saying you have cancer genes or mutations or single nucleotide polymorphisms or whatever. It's muscle tissue, right? And then I started going down that rabbit hole. And eventually, the National Library of Medicine, they put out an article. I love it. They put out this article, and the article got me to going so crazy. I wound up writing this book, which is actually had a learning curve. Okay, right. This was my learning curve because at the time I didn't know that Amazon had limits. Amazon published. I didn't know they had limits. I thought you could write a book, any size book you wanted. So this was the actual book. Then I found out the hard way, there's page limits. So I basically just split the book in two, and it became the goat book, right? Le is the in French. So le goat is the goat, right? Le goat book and the Horace and Set transaction. So technically, this was supposed to be one book, right? There's a lot more reference material in the back of this book than this book, but that's because they were supposed to be one book, right? But inside this book, okay, on page 547, we go into the Harvard article on push-up capacity and cardiovascular health. But that is not the important thing that I'm looking for. Here we go. Hold up. Let him cook. Let him cook. Okay, page 487. No. Page 490, if you have the book, right? If you have the book, we discuss an article. Now, we discuss a lot in this book, but we have this article here, like in most of the books, we have a bunch of articles and reference material to validate and back up what may seem like crazy, eccentric, or even pseudo claims, right? Or just crazy stuff that this guy with gold teeth calling himself a naturopathic doctor, just making up, right? But we go through this article to pinpoint that although they're late, because this article dropped in 2020. So 2020, when an article drops in a scientific journal, that's considered cutting edge science and has not got to mainstream. It's not taught in medical schools yet. It's not taken in consideration in your hospital setting yet. It's not a part. It's a brand new finding. It's a new discovery as per 2020. Now, mitochondrial phenotype as a driver of the racial dichotomy in obesity and insulin resistance, right? So what they find in 2020 is that mitochondria function differently in different groups of people. That not even your mitochondria are the same. Again, another reason why I'm championing RFK, because nothing about our bodies are the same. So to create a treatment modality that's one size fits all is insane, right? And you know that the mitochondria is where cellular respiration happens. So half of the respiration story is here, the lungs, and at the center of the lungs is your heart, right? So that's the first half of the respiration story is lungs and heart. And then the other half of the respiration story is hemoglobin. It's a pigment story, right? So the hemoglobin that makes up your blood is also the hemoglobin that makes up the electron transport chain inside the mitochondria, where cellular respiration happens, right? So when I was going through this whole article, if we go to page 494, right? You go all the way to the bottom. It says preferential input of electrons into cytochrome 1 via NAD linked substrates in African Americans. Heightened glycolytic flux ensues, greater provision of NAD linked pathways from cytosol. NADH is brought into the mitochondrial matrix via malate aspartate and or lactate shuttles, subsequently supporting the cytochrome 1 linked respiration, right? So what they're highlighting is that there's a preference between carbohydrate metabolism in equatorial people versus polar people, which have a fat-driven preference. Now, is that to say that Black folks only metabolize fruits and vegetables or sugars? No. Is that to say white folks only? No. But what they are saying is there are marked differences in how we metabolize carbohydrates and fats. It's cytochrome 1 and cytochrome 2. Cytochrome 1 is carbohydrates, cytochrome 2 is fats, for all intents and purposes, right? And so there are differences in the efficiency of cytochrome 1 and cytochrome 2 amongst the different groups of people. And so this whole article centers around that fact, and that because there are differences in how we metabolize carbs and fats, that difference contributes to our overall body structure, our muscle and fat distribution, our muscle and fat storage, right? Which then plays a role in our bone density, our anabolic hormone cascade, et cetera, all the way out to diabetes, disease, right? So hopefully we're making sense. And if you don't have these books, if you don't have the GOAT book, you don't have the Horrors and Set transaction, you know what to do. Go to Amazon, add these to your cart. Come on, say it after me. Check out. Go to Amazon, add them to your cart. Check out, right? So, all that said to say, right, this is where we get into painting the picture as best as we can with the averages, right? Some estimates of all of the numbers that have to do with your, and we go deeper in the book, right? We go into the amount of mitochondria per cell, right? The amount of mitochondria per cell, and you know, I don't know, some people say we get a little too crazy with the numbers, right? But the more numbers you have, the more specificity, the more, for me, is wonder and awe and reverence inspiring. And then it's also a better idea of what you need to be doing to combat whatever's going on, right? Because how can you fix a brain issue if you don't know how the brain works, right? And it's not possible to understand how the brain works without understanding the relationship of the brain to the aorta, right? Forget about the vagus nerve, right? You got a bunch of hippies and get high folks. Oh, the vagus nerve is the connection between the brain and the heart. And it is, but it's the connection between the brain and the heart is the aorta, right? That is the connection between the brain, the heart, and everything else, right? It's like the heart is the mafia boss in the movie, right? It's like the heart is like Marlon Brando, you know? And then there's the right-hand man. Or better yet, forget the Godfather, American Gangster, right? Remember when Denzel was going off at the party? And nobody talks to me. Nobody talks to me. You talk to you, and you talk to me. That's how the heart giving it up. Nobody talks to the heart. Everybody talks to the aorta, right? You talk to the aorta. You don't talk to the heart, right? That's how it goes, right? The aorta is the metu. The aorta is the metu of metus, right? Is the aorta, right? And then you have the Djed, the windpipe, which are metus in their own right, but for the heart, right? The power, the source of power for living, right? The thing that keeps you upright, right? Because in Kemet, sideways was death, right? Upright is life. Sideways death, upright life. The thing that keeps you upright is the aorta, right? Which is why it in of itself was depicted as the power of the king. Because the king represented God in the flesh, right? The king was supposed to be the primary manifestation of the natures or of God, the interface for God and the people. Then later, Rome came up with a fantastic idea to solidify global power by creating this idea of Pope. Whoop. We're just going to lock this in. So any country can have their own whatever, emperor, king, president, doesn't matter. We getting ready to lock us in a program over here where, yeah, we have a permanent interface between God and man. So if you're a king, an emperor, a president, a dictator, whatever you calling yourself, you're still going to be listed as man, and you get. So there's that, right? Okay. Enough backstory, right? I'm talking y'all to death, right? Enough backstory. All right, so I think I'm starting to learn how our patterns go, right? I think I'm learning our patterns, right? I think I'm learning our patterns. So we go live, we get super chats, we get cash apps, we get love. To the next time we go live, we need Tico or Peyton to set it off every video, right? Oh, I know what I want to do. I know what I want to do. Let me open up. Let me close this and open up. I think it's Ebers Papers Volume 2. I think it's Ebers Papers Volume 2. Okay, yeah. Okay, so all right, so we have this, right? Now, again, remember, I had my little micro fracture. I had my little micro fracture incident. So I was in the bed. So while I was in the bed, I said, let me just jump in a quick little Stanford. Let me just jump in a little online class. I seen Stanford has something that was inexpensive. Harvard got some classes on neuroscience that I want to take, but that class is $1,500. So I need a whole lot of support to take that class. But I jumped in the Stanford class. And when I jumped in the Stanford class, right, when I jumped in the Stanford class, right, when I jumped in the Stanford class, all of my old school personal trainer stuff kind of popped back into my mind. I think that's probably why I pulled that NASM book out too. I think people don't be believing. They gotta just be saying stuff sometimes. So when I went through the class, we had to review the Fick's equation. And the first thing popped into my mind. With that was the VO2Max. Okay. So in this book, right, Farrow and Associates LLC Real Estate Group. Now, some people, they see the title of that and they go, oh, EnQi, you trying to get into real estate. This book has nothing to do with selling real estate, tax liens, or none of that stuff. This is not entrepreneur. This is not that kind of book, right? If you look at the back of the book, right? The back of the book will give you an idea what the book is about, right? On the back of the book, it says glucose metabolism has to be matched by oxygen. Each glucose molecule leaves 2 single carbon atoms behind that require 2 oxygen atoms each. And then you have the VO2max equation, right? You have the VO2max equation. Then you have VO2 max, maximum oxygen consumption. This Fick equation is never used in diabetes discussions, but it should be. Maximum oxygen consumption should be used to describe sugar and insulin metabolism, right? So that is what I wanted to highlight, amongst other things. You know, we go a little crazy. Where we start is never where we finish in these books, right? But the reason why I titled the book the way I did was because when we started this conversation, what did we talk about? Man being a hybrid between animals and the divine and the gods, right? Between the earth or Geb and the spirit or Shu, right? And we don't have that reverence of land, right? We don't get the spirituality part, which is in the name, but it's not in the name anymore, because landlord is now like MFer, like yeah, landlord is like MFer now, like, but lord of the land, right? That had a whole history attached to it, right? Because life comes from the land, right? And wealth at some point came from the land, because largely agriculture, right? And then from agriculture, even mineral resources and things like that became the fuel and the fiber of the technology, the technological age. Yeah, I think that's it right there. The technological age, right? Technology runs on and through the things that we bring up from the soil, right? So if not for the copper and the carbon and, the silver and the gold and the platinum and all of the things that's inside your cell phone, your laptop, your tablet that you're watching this video on, it wouldn't be able to harness the quote unquote netchers, the gods, the electromagnetic radio waves in the air right? Wouldn't be able to harness them, to be able to encode voices, faces, likenesses, sound, color, right? And transmit them in a way, that we have our world that we live in now, right? So land has always had that, but just that initial connection is the connection between land and the breath. The connection between land and the breath is you and I, right? So anyway, get the book. You want to know more? Get the book, right? Farrell and Associates, LLC, Real S-State Group, right? S-State is the spiritual state, S-State Group, right? That's why I'm saying S-State instead of estate, right? But yeah, we have some interesting ideas. Because I talk about the future of medicine, or at least, I know I don't want to get too far off subject, but as we move into a world where people's bodies has more fake stuff in it, you're replacing body parts, and you got fake hearts, pacemakers, and stuff like that. And Elon is doing his best to create fake neurons, right? So we can start implanting neurons, uploading our memories, and slowly but surely replacing our brain with microchips and transmitters and things of that nature. There's going to be a lot of legal battles. There's going to be a lot of legal battles where they're going to have, especially as AI, comes on strong, they're going to have to adjudicate, right? They're going to have to adjudicate, what it means to be human, spirit, these things are all going to, and you don't realize it, but humanity had a victory with Trump getting in office over Kamala. But it's not going to end there. Trump's out of there in 4 years, right? So these things will come back up. Transhuman, transgender, and then, the rise of AI and the robots is on the way, right? And the only thing they have really that's going to, because in court, you have two things, right? In court, you have two things, right? You have the original laws, right? And then you have case laws, right? You have original law and case law. And basically, original law is how you trace things back, right? So you got municipal, city, state, federal, in order, in pecking order, right? And then when you get all the way back as far as you can go to a given law, right? Then you have the battle of case law. How have previous judges interpreted? And so what you only have is really mineral rights and water rights, right? Mineral rights and water rights are closely linked and often interrelated concepts, right? This is based in, these are like subsections in land law. So land law, water rights, mineral rights, just remember I predicted it. When it gets crazy, because it's coming, and they start trying to adjudicate different things and aspects of what's human, what's not, and drawing the line. This is why you see on a lot of big platforms, they're having conversations about the fabric of consciousness. What is consciousness, right? The reason is because they need to figure this out, or at least get a working idea that they can take into court. So it may seem like these are just purely philosophical conversations, but trust you me, you have big companies that have big ideas, things that are illegal that they're trying to lobby Congress to, work around, and it's big money out there. Anyway, back to oxygen, right? Back to oxygen. Blah, 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 blah. Vitamin D, calcium, blah, 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 blah. Okay, the Fick equation. Is this you right here? Okay, I think this is you. Right? So the Fick equation, right? VO2Max Q times A minus B. Oh man, I knew that wasn't gonna work. And I just kept on pushing it. All right. Yeah, so this is why it made more sense for me to stop the video and start a whole little Nefer NeferLand video, right? Times A minus B O2, right? This is the Fick equation, max oxygen consumption, right? Now, the Q, right? The Q is cardiac output, right? Now, mind you, we're having this conversation, right? And this is Comedic Naturopathy Workbook number 9, just so you have the number, right? Comedic Naturopathy Workbook number 9, right? Where we are breaking down the course material, the Legend of Lucia, right? But as demonstrated earlier, anyway, we saw it somewhere. Melanin versus Diabetes, book number 2, right? These are our core precepts. We just, in the Ebers Papers book right here. Oh man, hold up. I didn't mean you had to do that. I did not mean you had to do that. I don't know your pocket. I don't know your budget. I know everybody. If they could, they would. Sometimes people need a reminder like, hey, hit the Cash App. Now I got to start programming myself to find some way to say, hit the super chat. I don't know. I got to figure that out. But I definitely appreciate that. Oh my goodness. There you go, Amber, off the top ropes. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, see, I haven't got used to accepting these gifts in public. So y'all really gonna make me cry one day on the live stream. I gotta get used to accepting the love like that in public, getting gifts, receiving. Yeah, y'all are messing. I don't even know what I was talking about. Oh, I know what I was saying. I appreciate that. I definitely received that. So here's what I was saying. Now, this is the Ebers Papers Volume 2, right? This is the Ebers Papers Volume 2, right? And this is in the, I believe this is congestive heart failure. this congestive heart failure or is this dementia? Let me see. I think this is congestive heart failure. Man, this is a long section, right? Okay, yeah. This is congestive heart failure. Man. Okay, yeah. All right, so yeah, this is congestive heart failure. So this is Ebers Papers, Volume 2. We in the congestive heart failure section. And we were closing out. And I told y'all the other day we was going to circle back around to it. And I guess when I said that, I knew that we kind of needed a whole little vibe, right? We needed a whole little vibe to go back over just the idea behind some of the math, right? To keep the ma'ath, the math balanced, right? But here we talk about cardiac output, stroke volume, blah, blah, blah. So I just wanted to kind of show you that in workbook number 9, right, we kind of already start this conversation, right? So the cardiac output, right, and then just keep in your mind the 60 and 60, right? That's kind of why I have that there, right? 60 and 60. 60 push-ups in 60 seconds, a set of exercise every 60 minutes, a cup of water every 60 minutes, 60,000 miles in 60 seconds, 60 milliliters of blood ejected every 60 seconds, and cardiac output, right? So not only is this our push-up goal, but this is also a mnemonic device for remembering all of this other biochemistry / cardiology, right? 60 and 60 is not only our push-up program, but it's also a mnemonic device to remember the biochemistry and the cardiology, right? Try to make that as big as possible, right? And cardiac output is how much blood your heart pumps every 60 seconds, right? How much total blood your heart pumps every 60 seconds, right? So that in the Fick's equation, or in the Fick equation, which is Fick's equation, yeah, whatever. That's what the Q represents, right? So the Q represents cardiac output, right? And this is basically the cardiac output is heart rate by stroke volume, right? Remember that old school song? I be stroking. That's what I be doing. Right? Stroke volume. The stroke is basically like the hands of time, right? Go back to seconds, the hands of time, right? Each time the heart beats, heart rate, right? Each time the heart beats, right? How much blood is pushed out of the ventricles, right? How much blood is pushed out of the ventricles is basically your stroke volume, right? And then the heart rate is telling you how many times or how many strokes you're going to have per minute, right? Your personal clock, right? how many beats do you have per minute? A healthy heart, 60 beats per minute, right? But as you get older, you get more beats per minute. As your heart gets weaker, you have more beats per minute, right? So just so you have that frame of reference in mind, the slower the heart, the healthier you are, right? The slower the heart, the healthier you are, right? Now, don't let that go into your mind and then you say, well, oh, I wonder how I can artificially slow down my heart. Because artificially slowing down the heart is called heroin. I just wanted to put that on the record real quick, right? So we have young brothers and sisters every day slowing down their heart on the lean, and even to the point where that became such a part of hip hop. See, we got this comedic science is deep down in our DNA, and it's being twisted, perverted, and it's turned into some demonic, right? But a lot of these things come from a good place. We don't have the education, so we don't know how to, you know what I mean? We don't know how to, we don't know what we really doing out here, but the urge, what is these children doing? I'm getting ready to fight all 5 of y'all if y'all keep violating my live stream. And y'all only want to get crazy on the good parts. Yo, as soon as I get to a good part, they start crashing. I don't know what they're doing out there. Something probably with the dog. And usually the dog. Yes, I should have said all 6 of y'all, because I know Ocean is involved. Whenever I start hearing a lot of noise, I know Ocean is involved with whatever's going on out there. But, the lean. So this is where the lean came in, and in the South, right, where they're getting the most sun, where they at the equator, they came in with the slowing the heart down culture, right? The lean culture. They even started taking records and slowing the records down and made a whole genre of hip hop that goes with using heroin. There's a heroin hip hop. Heroin hip hop. And Texas proudly lays claim to be the originators. DJ Screw is heroin hip hop, literally. They get high on the lean and their heart slow. Now, they don't know that they're slowing their heart down, right? They don't know that when you OD on heroin, man, who was this white guy Tony was in love with? It was a rapper. I forget this guy's name. But my daughter Tony was in love with this guy. And he had his own following, and record labels was trying to sign him, and he wouldn't sign or whatever. I know that's what she said she loved about him. But anyway, he died from overdosing, and he had a famous girlfriend, and they had an argument. Something anyway. But basically, heroin slows down your respiratory system. You get too high. That's how you see him. Like that's where the lean comes from. The lean is the dope fiend lean, right? Back in the days in New York, when I was a child, that's how we could distinguish between like crackheads and dope fiends. Like the dope fiends would be out there like that, leaning, right? So coming from the North, I don't know how it was packaged to make it seem like it was a cool idea to get lean and hair. But from the North, you couldn't pay us enough to try lean. Like lean? Are you insane? Right? Anyway. So yeah, don't try to synthetically slow your heart down. You synthetically slow your heart down, you're in trouble. right? Because the rest of your body is still going at full speed and your heart is going slow. So if your heart's going slow and your whole body is going at its normal speed, there's going to be a disconnect between the oxygen and the tissues, and you're going to drift off into Never Neverland, not Nefer NeferLand. You're going to go into Never Neverland, right? So the way that you naturally slow down the heart rate and the tissues and all of those things is cardiovascular exercise, is building the intercostals and the diaphragm and the skeletal muscle as a secondary or as an echo chamber for blood circulation, because that's what you're doing. Every time you exercise, you're using the primary muscle group and the accessory muscle groups as blood pumps, right? Which is where the term pump comes from, right? You do push-ups and then you go take off your shirt in the bathroom so you can look at your fake chest, because you look like something for, like the next 15, 20 minutes. You're going to look like, you got something going on. So nowadays, folks do their push-ups real quick and then take that pic and then throw that pic on the gram. Yeah, they throw that pic on the gram. Bro, you catfishing. It's the same as the ladies with the fake pics with the filter. You catfishing because your chest really don't look like that. You done did, 30, 45 hour worth of push-ups to push every ounce of blood you could into the pecs and get that thing as swollen as possible. Took that pic. Then 30 minutes later, when the blood go back down, your chest don't look like that, right? Yeah. Oh, prayer time. Mac Miller, yes, Mac Miller, Inner Beauty. Inner Beauty been with us for so long. Shout out to Inner Beauty. It's always good to see you in the chat. But yeah, Mac Miller, she was in love with everything Mac Miller. I was like, bro, what, who, how? But yeah, Mac Miller died. And then the other one, I used to call him the Black Mac Miller. It was another one. He died on drugs too. He was singing about the getting high. I forgot his name. Anyway, it's definitely prayer time. So let's get busy with the get busy real quick. Let's get busy with the get busy. I feel like we should show both videos though. Yeah, let's get the exercise in first. Let's get the exercise video in first, and then let's show the other video. Just for the people that don't understand, right? So I'm gonna show both versions of this video real quick, right? It's the prayer, right? But our prayer is for multiple purposes. It's a mnemonic device so that we can learn the pathway of the blood, the pathway of oxygen, the pathway of the spirit, right? But also so we can get our quick little exercise in and all of that at the same time, right? So one video shows the exercises, right? Toe raises is when you lift the front of your foot up, right? And then calf raises or heel raises is when you go up on the front, like doing tippy toes, right? So you got toe raises, calf raises, right? We want to get a quick pump or blood flow. We want to push the blood into the muscles all the way down into the toes. And, you got a bunch of muscles in your feet, right? So you got arteries, not arteries, but capillaries, nerves, all of that kind of stuff. We want to push the blood down there. And then once we get the feet and the lower legs, the blood flowing, then we want to get into our squats, right? So we can quads, hams, glutes, push-ups, jumping jacks, get that thing flowing everywhere. And then, you know, obviously we'll do it, show it again so you could just see, you know, how we put together our little montage of anatomy, right? Our little montage of anatomy, again, to try to help paint the picture. EnQi prayer number 2. We give thanks and praise to the Most High God for the divine spark that set our cells into perpetual motion. We give thanks for the magnetism of the Most Holy, the magnetism that repels and attracts the ferry boats of light 60,000 miles every 60 seconds throughout our vessels and caves. We give thanks for the ability to drink clean water every 60 minutes, flooding the river of life. We give thanks that sugar has not covered our ferries and turned them into stone. We give thanks that darkness has not covered the riverbanks with calcium and turned them into stone. We give thanks that anger and fear have not turned our almonds bitter, turning our heart to stone. We give thanks for smooth sailing upstream through the valley of death, through the superior vena cava into the right atrium. We give thanks for smooth sailing around the heart through the corona crown, joining the vortex in the right atrium. We give thanks for the perfect black solar repeater that induces the primary electromagnetic wave, opening the mouth of the Kodesh HaKodeshim. We give thanks for the mechanical wave produced when the mouth of the Kodesh HaKodeshim closes. We give thanks to the ray wave, reflecting on the semi-lunar valves, opening a pathway to the vineyard. We give thanks for the mechanical wave produced when the lunar gate to the vineyard closes. We give thanks to the Most High God that provides the light and our breath, and the light in our breath. We give thanks for the fine olfactory system that makes our grapes ripe with light. We give thanks for the Djed pillar that provides us with a stable fleet of ferry boats to dock in our vineyard. We give thanks for smooth sailing through the pulmonary vein into the storm of the left atrium. We give thanks for the perfect black solar repeater that induces the primary electromagnetic wave, opening the mouth of the Kodesh HaKodeshim. We give thanks for the mechanical wave produced when the mouth of the Kodesh HaKodeshim closes. We give thanks to the ray wave, reflecting on the semi-lunar valves, opening a pathway into the holy royal arch of the Wa scepter. We give thanks for the mechanical wave produced when the lunar gate into the holy royal arch of the Wa scepter closes. We give thanks for the magnetism of the most holy, the magnetism that repels and attracts the ferry boats of light 60,000 miles every 60 seconds throughout our vessels and our caves. Amen. EnQi prayer number 2. We give thanks and praise to the Most High God for the divine spark that set our cells into perpetual motion. We give thanks for the magnetism of the Most Holy, the magnetism that repels and attracts the ferry boats of light 60,000 miles every 60 seconds throughout our vessels and caves. We give thanks for the ability to drink clean water every 60 minutes, flooding the river of life. We give thanks that sugar has not covered our ferries and turned them into stone. We give thanks that darkness has not covered the riverbanks with calcium and turned them into stone. We give thanks that anger and fear have not turned our almonds bitter, turning our heart to stone. We give thanks for smooth sailing upstream through the valley of death, through the superior vena cava into the right atrium. We give thanks for smooth sailing around the heart through the corona crown, joining the vortex in the right atrium. We give thanks for the perfect black solar repeater that induces the primary electromagnetic wave, opening the mouth of the Kodesh HaKodeshim. We give thanks for the mechanical wave produced when the mouth of the Kodesh HaKodeshim closes. We give thanks to the ray wave, reflecting on the semi-lunar valves, opening a pathway to the vineyard. We give thanks for the mechanical wave produced when the lunar gate to the vineyard closes. We give thanks to the Most High God that provides the light and our breath, and the light in our breath. We give thanks for the fine olfactory system that makes our grapes ripe with light. We give thanks for the Djed pillar that provides us with a stable fleet of ferry boats to dock in our vineyard. We give thanks for smooth sailing through the pulmonary vein into the storm of the left atrium. We give thanks for the perfect black solar repeater that induces the primary electromagnetic wave, opening the mouth of the Kodesh HaKodeshim. We give thanks for the mechanical wave produced when the mouth of the Kodesh HaKodeshim closes. We give thanks to the ray wave, reflecting on the semi-lunar valves, opening a pathway into the holy royal arch of the Wa scepter. We give thanks for the mechanical wave produced when the lunar gate into the holy royal arch of the Wa scepter closes. We give thanks for the magnetism of the most holy, the magnetism that repels and attracts the ferry boats of light 60,000 miles every 60 seconds throughout our vessels and our caves. Amen.
Yo, I think that's the best beat.
I know y'all see the twins when I bring the twins on here, my brothers in politics, right? One of the twins is actually from the music universe, right? He's from the music universe. He was down with Timbaland and Missy and Jodeci and Eric Sermon and EPMD. So he got gold and platinum plaques for making a lot of different beats. But I personally believe that is his best beat he ever made. Oh, I love him dearly for that beat. He just, oh, you like that beat? Yeah, that's yours. Yeah, that's yours. Yeah, that's yours. All right. Oh, don't forget that these books here are all based on cardiology to a greater or lesser extent. Now, the perspective that we approach the Christ series of books from is different, to say the least. But all of these books, and we will shortly return to these books, right? As we go further and further down the rabbit hole, we'll have no choice, right? All right. So cardiac output. Hit the button and hit the other button, and then bam. Okay. So cardiac output, stroke volume, heart rate. Total blood pumped out the heart every 60 seconds. Now, you could think about your 60 and 60, your push-ups, in a totally different way, right? Because now, right, hopefully the throughway between the core of what Freemasonry is, right? Geometry and spirituality. Hopefully it starts to click and just make more sense as things go on. Even the term being out of shape, like literally, right? Literally being out of shape, right? Being out of shape. Being out of shape means that your energy distribution is going to be, right? Literally being out of shape is the cause of metabolic disease. What is metabolic disease? The process or the system, right? Or problem in the system of your body producing, circulating, metabolizing, and storing and utilizing energy, right? So when we go all the way back to the ancient precepts, sacred geometry, that's what form denotes function, right? The shape determines how energy moves around inside of a thing. So if it's out of shape, right? If it's out of shape, right? But now when we get into the boom womp boom womp boom womp boom womp boom womp boom womp, like that's what this normally is the Charlie Brown teacher. Like, so when we get in there and we start making sense of these things, right? Just keep trying to understand the ancients saw simplicity as genius. So literally, we over here trying to create geniuses. This is genius school, like where nowadays it's about complexity. Right? I have to keep reminding people of that because I think that's a big part of the problem. Right? We see genius as, a big wall-sized chalkboard with crazy, complicated math equations that nobody can understand, written on the board except for one guy. And oh yeah, he's a genius. Not only can nobody else explain the equations, but he can't even paraphrase or package the information in the equations to make sense to his own. Like, we have to stop with that. That is not genius. Okay, that's not genius, right? That's not genius, right? Genius is being able to package complicated stuff and simplify it so that people can grab it and then do something with it. You can apply it to your life, right? So out of shape, we get it now. Out of shape means the energies not going to be right, period. So whether it's a respiratory condition, cardiovascular condition, metabolic condition, you out of shape, right? And now we can go, getting in shape is what directly affects the heart rate, right? So if we want to get the heart rate to slow down naturally, well, you got to try to get back in shape, right? You got to try to lose the excess fat, build up the muscle, right? You got to build up the muscle, lose the fat, try to get all that calcium from out of your blood, right? Try to rejuvenate, get the where them books at? Right? We got a whole little series within a series, the 360 books, sports articulation. Right? Sports articulation, right? On the tendons, the ligaments, the joints, right? Your knees, shoulders, elbows, ankles, right? But, getting that fluid back in there. And that's basically slowly but surely, yeah, there's nutrition to it, but it's a matter of restoring the pressure, right? And remembering your bones are piezoelectric, right? So if you notice, if you start reading those 360 books, you're going to see we constantly reference back to the piezoelectrochemistry book, because there's no such thing as bone health. It doesn't matter what bone it is, right? Or system of bones. It doesn't matter if it's the knees or the spine, right? Without the piezoelectrochemistry being the basis of, the healing modality, you going down the wrong direction, right? So that's another part that the neurosurgeon is missing. It's another part the neurosurgeon was missing, which is why he like, yo, I quit. Because the foundation of the bone is missing from the bone science, right? The spine, the brain, the connection of the brain to the skull in modern medicine is like a new area of exploration, right? Bone morphogenic proteins and some of those things are last 20 years, they really starting to get into that, right? But you go back to Kemet, that was all together, right? Now, in terms of the spine or the Djed pillar, that's always been, in neurological science, that's always been together, right? That's always been one unit. The spine is where the bone and the neurons and the pigment and all of the most sophisticated aspects of your body come together, right? Bone marrow, everything is there in the Djed pillar, right? But specific to our conversation, the bone and the neurons, right? The brain matter and the neurons, right? So the brain matter and the neurons, the brain matter and the bone. So we have to remember, as much as we understand that neurons are electromagnetic, right? They produce, electrical gradient across the cell membrane, blah, blah, blah. You have to remember, bone is piezoelectric. So you can't restore bone health without pressure, mechanical waves, pressure waves, right? That's what stimulates growth in the first place in the bone. Bone has a scale to it, like everything else in the body has a scale to it. And the bone is constantly measuring the amount of pressure you put on it day to day to figure out the right measure of osteoblast and osteoclast activity to get you to have the right amount of bone. So if you get injured and then you stay off your feet, right? Staying off your feet is also staying off your spine. You don't put any pressure on it. Don't put any pressure on it. Well, the bone don't know any better. Bone just gonna start breaking down. Yeah, it's gonna start breaking down. Less pressure means you need less bone. We can break this thing on down, right? So anyway, you gotta always keep that in mind, right? All right. Back to where we at. And now I'll be getting lost and having these little tangents and just going off on a tirade. Anyway, so VO2Max, cardiac output, blah, blah, blah. Slow your heart rate down by exercising and eating better. Stroke volume, basically how much blood cleanly exits the heart for each beat. Arteriovenous oxygen difference. Okay, so inside the body, you have, and I make a big deal out of the aorta, but you also have the gobbledinger. I think that's how they say that. The gobbledinger. I think that's how you say it. The gobbledinger. Right? And we go through it in the prayer. Right? We go through it in the prayer. Trying to see if I can find a nice picture. Dun, 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 dun. Well, this is pretty cool. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Okay. So if you look at this, right, you see that the red, which is basically your aorta, and then all of the branches of the aorta, right? And then you see the bluish green, that blue magic. That's the vein system. If you notice, it mirrors the artery system, right? It mirrors the artery system, right? And we talk about coming through the valley of shadow of death. That's the inferior vena cava, right? When we say vessels and caves, right? We are reading the book, so y'all should know, right? But that's cava, right? Caverns, right? Throughout our vessels and our caves, right? But come through the superior vena cava back into the heart, right? So when you look at this equation, the AV part is basically trying to figure out the difference between how much blood in the arteries has oxygen, right? The amount of blood in the heart, no. The amount of oxygen in the blood in the arteries, right? Then you subtract the amount of oxygen left over, which is in your veins, right? When you subtract the average amount of oxygen in the veins from the average amount of oxygen in the arteries, this number, X, right? X oxygen basically tells you how much oxygen your muscles are using up, your cells and tissues are using up, right? Your cells and tissues are using up. And the more in shape you are, right, the lower this number is. Wait. The greater this number is, right? The lower this number is, right? The lower this number is. You want your muscles and your cells and your tissues to use up all of the oxygen, basically, that your lungs provide, right? You want your tissues to use up all of the oxygen. So you want this number to be low and you want this number to be high, right? You want this number to be low. This is the oxygen that your tissues did not consume, right? And you want this number to be high, right? Now, this right here is a pigment relationship math equation. This here is pigment, right? That's what this is about. This is about pigment, right? And this is a pigment conversation that doesn't really involve melanin, right? But this is a pigment conversation, right? Because this is really about hemoglobin, right? How much oxygen the hemoglobin is getting, right? Now, we talk about this top part of the equation, the arterial oxygen level in the blood. We talk about that almost, I ain't gonna say exclusively, but we make a big deal out of it in wherever this book is. The Osiris Diabetes and Respiration book. I almost always have that book with me somewhere, which is why it's almost always lost, because it's important, right? Osiris Diabetes and Respiration, right? And we talk about that as one of the main factors of diabetes, right? So I don't want y'all to get confused because we're going into the math that we haven't had it as a part of our narrative, our storytelling, right? Because one of the main facets, features of our conversation. What are they doing? Oh my God. I have officially turned into one of those parents that goes crazy when the children have vacation. It's crazy. I went from not being able to let them go. Going from homeschool to school is crazy. Like most parents, right? Because now homeschool is a big thing, right? COVID, the pandemic started a homeschool craze, right? So most parents throughout the country, they had their children in school, and then COVID came, and then they converted to homeschool, and they just never sent their children back. They kept their children in homeschool for whatever. They liked the flow of homeschooling. They got themselves, they acclimated their lives to a homeschool kind of flow. And so they just stuck with it, right? I did the opposite. I'm always the unicorn doing the opposite, right? I was homeschooling. Post-COVID, I sent my babies to real school. So I couldn't deal with it. I was having withdrawal symptoms. Like I was going through postpartum. Yeah, I was going through it. Now, I'm like, them schools got to open back up. Get these babies. Right? But in the Osiris Diabetes and Respiration book, right? we've been talking about, and before that even, the uncoupling of metabolism and respiration, right? When the metabolic system uncouples from the respiratory system, that's when the problems come in, right? That's when the problems come in. And as we start to build up, the common threats, cholesterol, high blood pressure, calcium deposits, and all of those other things, one of the things that's not really discussed as much is the pulmonary membrane, right? So you see in the video, prayer video, when the unoxygenated blood or the deoxygenated blood, the carbon dioxide carrying blood travels through the lungs, or just, travels through the lungs to release the carbon dioxide and get reoxygenated, right? What separates the blood from the lungs, right, is obviously the vessel walls, right, carrying the blood, but then the lung tissue walls, right? And those two together, the lung tissue wall and the vessel wall, is called the pulmonary membrane, right? That's where the oxygen and the carbon dioxide have to go across, right? So the oxygen has to jump from the lungs through the lung tissue, through the vessel, into the blood. The carbon dioxide has to jump through, the opposite direction. Jump through the vessel walls, through the lung tissue walls, to be expelled, right? That pulmonary membrane, it gets thicker. As it gets thicker, it's harder to breathe. As that pulmonary membrane gets thicker in there, right? As that gets thicker, it gets harder for the oxygen and carbon dioxide to move. So now, as that gets thicker, you need more and more lung pressure. You need more lung pressure to do that same transfer, right? You need more iron to do that same transfer. So what's happening is, as that pulmonary membrane gets thicker and you can't breathe as well, right? You can't breathe as well, you feel in the energy, right? So if you notice, a bunch of these different symptoms from different conditions is low energy, right? Low energy. And so your brain, it's like, once you low energy, it doesn't go like breathe harder or breathe, our instinct is always sugar. Sugar is the fast energy. So as the pulmonary membrane and respiration slows down and gets more difficult, our body sends us the messages to make up for the lack of energy with sugar, carbohydrates, right? But the problem is, we wouldn't even be going down the road of the pulmonary membrane thickening and losing energy, et cetera, if we weren't already having a problem metabolizing glucose and insulin in the first place. So we get the idea, the appetite to instinct for sugar, but we're not metabolizing the sugar and the insulin anyway, right? So we get caught, right? We get caught in between the rock and the hard place. And 3, 4, 5,000 years ago, they already had a working solution. Like, okay, we're not going to add more sugar to ferment. We're not going to add more sugar to ferment, right? We're going to work on this other part. We're going to work on this other part, the respiration. So this is where the idea of stillness, right? Stillness and the breath comes from, right? Remember, the perfect black is green. The green man, those ideas originate with a saw. We'll see it, right? Stillness, a plant. A plant uses its pigment to exercise. A plant uses its pigment to exercise, right? The gas exchange, right? Converting the light to energy, stillness. It's a matter of breathing for a plant, right? So going back to what I was saying at the top of the video a few hours ago, I know I'd be talking so much, you gotta get practice at sorting out my nonsense. Right? But the yoga practices or the stillness, the breathing, and what I was saying, the breath, rewiring the brain, spine, nerve process, right? Because our natural way, especially that we're not taught, so our natural way to breathe is where, as we inspire, right, as we breathe in, we pull our stomach in, right? We pull our stomach in with each breath, and we let our stomach out as we exhale, right? But that's the exact opposite way. That's like the lazy breathing. That's lazy breathing, because what we're doing is, so here's how, this is what you need, right? You only really need muscles to breathe in, right? It's like a balloon. You need muscles to force the air into the balloon. But once the balloon is blown up, you don't need muscles to let the air out. All you got to do is get out the way. The air goes out, the balloon shrinks, right? It's the snapback reflex from the tension of the balloon itself. So your lungs are the same. There's a snapback reflex from the lungs themselves, right? So it's a lazy way of letting the lungs just kind of do it itself. And it's the unconscious mechanism of breathing. So if you remember and you go all the way back, like when I asked for requests for books, now I think I came up with a good book for the Patreon family, at least to start. I think we're going to start with the Money Mind State, right? It's a very old book that I wrote, but I think it has a lot of, it's probably a bunch of stuff that has years been passed, needs to be updated, corrected, probably just crossed out. So it might be some crazy stuff in there. But it also has a lot of good seeds and jewels that we can build on. You can use to write your own book, as well as expand your mind a little bit on some of the ideas, or whatever the case may be. But so there's that, you know what I'm saying? But what I'm saying is, when we talk about the medulla oblongata, right, the oblong square, right, and then inside that, the Botzinger complex, right, the goat book we talked about. Somebody asked for the goat book. That's how I went off on that little. But somebody said, "Oh, you should give away the goat book," right? That was originally Melanin vs. Diabetes book 5, but it's out of print now. So that's where that is. Somebody think, "Oh, you should." But in that book, one of the things we discuss is the medulla oblongata, and inside that, the Botzinger complex, controlling the patterns of your breath, how you sigh, how you couple breathing sometimes, and the relation of that to some of the fractions in the ayah rule. We went down a whole nother rabbit hole. Anyway, changing that pattern to conscious control of your breath, you do the opposite, right? You do the opposite. Instead of letting your stomach come in as you inhale, right? As you inhale, you let your stomach go out. And when you do that, hopefully you can see that on. When you breathe that way, you will not only feel, you will notice that you get more oxygen in each breath. And the more oxygen you get in each breath, you slow your heart rate down, right? So you'll get more oxygen in, but you'll also feel the parts of your lungs up here fill up with air, and you'll feel them pushing on the ribs, right? You'll feel it. You'll feel it. And if you're a current smoker or an ex-smoker, you're going to feel the difference in breathing, lazy breathing, right? Which is unconscious, versus conscious breathing, where you expand your belly, right? So you're consciously working the diaphragm and all of the accessory muscles, right? So you feel, once this fills, or feels like it's full anyway, because there's no lungs down here, but once you get here with it, you're going to feel the air fill up the upper parts of the lungs. When that happens, not only do you get more oxygen in the lungs, but you also get more nitric oxide, which facilitates the oxygen moving. Nitrogen oxide, so nitrogen is important. So back in the days, nitrogen was thought to be an inert gas in terms of your respiration, right? That's how nitrogen was viewed, as an inert gas, right? So that breathing I just showed you, you might want to just start off with like 5 or 10 reps. It seemed like it's easy, but it's not. It's hard, and you'll feel the strain on the inside of your ribs, and like all in your ribs and your lungs. You will feel it all in here, all down in here. You will feel it if you've never been doing that before, right? But nitrogen was thought to be inert, like it had no impact on your breathing. Fast forward, right? Now, comedic science taught something totally different. They always knew, which is why Anubis or Ampu or Impu, right, was the god of the entrance to the caves or the nose. Anyway, but nitrogen helps to maintain the pressure in the lungs. The pressure in the lungs. The more pressure you create every breath, right, the more easy the oxygen is transferred. Now that's inert nitrogen. Nitric oxide helps facilitate the transfer all the way through, right? So even malaria and sickle cell, right? The relation of malaria and sickle cell is pH in the blood. But the whole thing about pH in the blood, most people only learn the concept of pH from listening to either Dr. Sebi or what's that guy named? Wolfram something, or one of these food people, right? But food is not even close to gas when it comes to influencing the pH of the blood. The strongest two influences, the strongest things that impact the pH of the blood is oxygen and carbon dioxide. Grand opening, grand closing, right? pH has a lot more to do with respiration than anything else. That's why I named that book The Power of Hydrogen is Divine, right? So if you understand that concept, of the gases controlling the pH, power of hydrogen, the gases, the breath from the spirit, then you get the title of the PhD book, Power of Hydrogen is Defined. Anyway, so hopefully we making sense, right? Hopefully you're getting, we making some sense, right? So blood, artery, oxygen, right? How much oxygen we get into the blood, right? That's the first part that we can control. We can control that, right? I just gave you a technique. Now, mind you, where did I get that technique from, right? And I just gave you that technique for free on YouTube. Whoop! That is not how I got that technique. Yeah, that's not how I got that technique, which is why we had to have conversations about the pharaohs as a real estate. This is another part of this book anyway. Pharaoh and Associates LLC, because they ran Kemet as a real estate company, right? So not just that man came from the soil and all of this kind of stuff, but they ran Kemet as a real estate company. So, you know, a lot of these stories about the surrounding countries of Kemet, at one point, all these surrounding countries were kingdoms of Kemet. Yeah. And this is why Akhenaten winds up playing such a role, because he was like the spoiled kid. When Akhenaten comes into power, Kemet is at his biggest, most, you know, they got millions of square miles surrounding the Giza Plateau. So all of those places, Canaan, India, you know, Kush, Sudan, all these places were at some point, right, a part of the Kemetic real estate company's holdings, right? So some of what I might call stealing the drip is not even stealing the drip, right? Because at some point we had colonies everywhere. And when we had colonies, we respected their culture and customs, but we also were teaching them our culture and customs. And then later on, when maybe people rose up and took back over, or, you know, other folks came in and took over Kemet. And then so people, you know, the bonds that connected these colonies or ancillary, you know, communities broke, and they went back to whatever they was doing, with some of the drip still intact. But once the connection to the source is broken, you know, they have to develop those things on their own, in their own language, after their own, you know, gods and you know, rituals and traditions, etc., right? So that's another piece why we had to discuss, you know, because Akhenaten, when he comes in, Kemet is at its peak in terms of real estate holdings, right? In terms of wealth, material wealth, right? So he doesn't really have to, like a spoiled rich kid, right? He don't got to get up, and he's not trying to get a degree so he can get a good job or figure out a hustle. He can focus purely on creating a language, Hebrew, or, you know, recreating chemistry and creating his own version of Egyptian blue, which is Armana blue, right? He can work on, you know, the arts and sciences, right? Which is how all cultures go, right? When you're struggling, you got to eat. You got to build your society, you got to eat. But once you get to a comfortable space, now you can work on arts and sciences, right? To a high degree, because you're no longer worried about food, clothes, and shelter. And the better you take care of food, clothes, and shelter, typically, the more higher your arts and sciences can progress, right? So anyway, blood, artery, oxygen, and then also the other part of this equation that we can control is, right, once we got a good amount of oxygen in the blood, how much of that oxygen is being utilized, right? And so that's a part of the Wascepter book. The Wascepter book, the subtitle is The Protein Shake Fountain of Youth, right? Because we talk about the youth proteins, right? And a bunch of different things, but we're also talking about in that book this concept, right? We're also talking about this concept because we're talking about the skeletal muscle as a secondary system of digestion, metabolism, and respiration. Whereas primarily people just see the skeletal muscle, the skeletal, superficial, but actually the more developed your skeletal muscle is, the less pressure you put on the heart. Now, I know that may sound crazy because you see a lot of bodybuilders having heart attacks. That's because of the drugs. That's because of the drugs, right? To artificially build the muscles, right? Artificially build up the organs. And then once they get artificial peaks in development, to push those muscles past those limits, right? Which doesn't always line up. And then boom, instant heart failure, right? But in real time, the natural way you build up the muscles, you take the pressure off the heart, right? But as you're building the muscle, you are also building the heart because the heart is muscle, right? The heart is so much muscle that it has its own classification of muscle, right? So you have skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and then cardiovascular muscle, heart muscle, right? And the aorta, the right-hand man, right, consigliere, right, is primarily smooth muscle tissue, right? So even that is about muscle. Circulation is about muscle. It's just internal muscle, smooth muscle, right? So once you work on getting a lot of oxygen in, then we want to work on the muscles, especially the internal muscle, because you have much more smooth muscle than you have skeletal muscle, right? Skeletal muscle, you have 608 or 660, depending on whose count you go by, right? Smooth muscle, you have to classify them almost by groups of tissue, groups of cells, which goes into the billions. So it's a crazy number, right? Yeah, it's an uncountable, ridiculous number, right? So the smooth muscle controls the circulation for the arteries, the veins, the lymphatic vessels, the metu, right? And the muscles themselves communicate, right? Because now science is expanding, right? You have cytokines, chemokines, and then you have myokines, right? Myokines, which are communication molecules that's produced by the muscles, right? So the muscles is producing their own IL, interleukin this, interleukin that, and all this and all that, right? So you can not only control how much oxygen gets into the blood, but then how much oxygen is taken out of the blood, right? And how much oxygen is taken out of the blood is also a proxy for water circulation, vitamin, minerals, all of that, right? All of those things you can use as a proxy with the oxygen, right? And this is why Okay, so the Dr. EnQi versus Dr. Sebi book. That's why this book is important, right? Because in this book, and it's not really Dr. EnQi versus Dr. Sebi, so relax. Y'all know I love Dr. Sebi. But it's just philosophies. That's all. It's just philosophies comparing and contrasting. But the majority of the book is about glycation, right? Glycation, the A1C concept, right? Sugars sticking to the pigments, right? What is that chemical process? How we can stop and reverse that chemical process, which is one of the hallmarks of diabetes, right? All diabetics have to go and they have to check their A1C number, right? The higher that number gets, the more in trouble you are. The reason why is because of this. Yeah. So the higher the A1C, so A1C is basically the opposite of this. A1C is the opposite of this, right? So the higher your A1C goes up, right? Can y'all see over there in this corner right here? Let's see, or better, I should put it over there. Yeah. Okay. So the higher your A1C goes up, right? That's going to affect this number and this number, right? So the higher your A1C, the higher this is going to be. Right? The higher your A1C, the higher this leftover oxygen is going to be. Right? And the higher your A1C, the lower your oxygen metabolism is going to be. Right? Because remember, this is measuring the oxygen in the artery blood versus the oxygen in the vein blood. Right? And so you want this number to be low. You want this number to be low. A1C is going to make this a higher number. Because as you get sugar coating the blood is able to hold less oxygen, carry less oxygen, distribute less oxygen, distribute less nutrients, etc., etc., etc. Right? Because the sugar is coating the red blood cell, right? So because it's coating the red blood cell, the iron, the oxygen, that whole connection between iron and oxygen, right? That's being inhibited or impeded, right? So in this book, right, the electrochemistry book, Dr. EnQi versus Dr. Sebi, the electrochemistry book, right? We go into glycation ad infinitum, right? Oh, we went kind of crazy in this book. We went all the way back to Galvani. Yeah, we went crazy in this book. Hold on, what page am I looking for? Let me see. Okay, yeah. So if you have this book, and you go to the chapter on sugar water, or chapter titled Sugar Water, right? The bonds between oxygen and hydrogen make the space near the oxygen negative and the space near oxygen, or rather, space near hydrogen positive. Water is not only a nucleophile, but is polar. Similar to water, sucrose has bonds between oxygen and hydrogen atoms, negative and positive. This makes the sugar very attractive via the areas of positive and negative charge. Carbon atoms play the background in the molecule. They don't contribute to sucrose being bipolar. You can see all the positive and negative charges, though. We have to really examine this from a few angles. The more we can see what's going on, it may provide us with more insight. We have to fully understand this chemistry. Then we have adhesion, right? Blah, blah, blah. Then we go. Oxygen has a -2 oxidation state. This means highly stable, blah, blah, blah. All right, sugar water is clingy to everything. The nutrients in the blood get gluey. It's not just about oxygen. In the Waceptor book, we discussed the 3,000 plus proteins in the bloodstream. Your blood cells are circulating with strands of fly tape on them. The viscosity levels go through the roof, right? So I have a little picture on page 27 to help you visualize, right, the idea of like your red blood cell with the old school fly tape on it, or fruit fly tape, right? You know, the sticky tape, and you pull it out and you put a thumbtack like on the cabinet or ceiling or whatever, and let the sticky tape. That's kind of how glycation. Hopefully, you know, that visualization. Try to get you to literally see what I'm saying, right? All right, saturation, blah, blah, blah. When sugar reaches or surpasses the saturation ratio, it begins to become solid in the liquid. This is how syrup and honey have that thickness. The ratio for sugar and water is 2:1, 14 pints of sugar and 7 pints of water. We go into culinary school from there. Adjusting body heat, aka temperature, is a surefire way to attempt to control chemistry. Le Chatelier's principle, a change in one of the variables that describe a system at equilibrium, produces a shift in the position of the equilibrium that counteracts the effect of this change. The Maillard reaction. Maillard reaction is an organic chemical reaction in which reducing sugars react with amino acids to form a complex mixture of compounds. Glycation, sometimes referred to as non-enzymatic glycosylation, glycosylation, there we go, occurs during the initial stage of the Maillard reaction, the first step in a complex series of Maillard or Browning reactions that proceed spontaneously between reducing sugars and proteins. So we go deep into the glycation process and what that means and how that impacts the blood, right? The A1C number is basically a mark to tell you how much glycation you got going on in the blood. Now, how much glycation you got going on in the blood is going to directly impact all of these parts of this equation. How much oxygen you get into the blood, how much oxygen you retain in the veins that your muscles have not metabolized, right? So hopefully we're linking these, right? Linking these things together. So this is how nobody dies from diabetes. Everybody dies from complications of diabetes, right? Because the complications of diabetes is what? Hypoxia. Your tissues are being starved, right? Your tissues are being starved of oxygen. And as they're being starved of oxygen, right, you're building up carbon, hypercapnia, right? And this is where ischemia and hypoxia can separate, because you can get blood flow and for one reason or another, your muscles are not metabolizing the oxygen well, right? Your tissues are not getting the oxygen, right? So you're low energy, and this is where the craving comes from, where people don't understand, right? These crazy cravings that we have for sugar, they come from two places. A, you got chemical addiction, right? But then B, right, because we got a drug factory, you know, in our brain, We produce dope, endorphins and cannabinoids and all that stuff internally. But the other part is every time the energy is low, we look for quick energy, which gives us a sweet tooth. Let me just grab some cookies or something, and then we usually couple the sugar with caffeine. Yeah, because we're looking for sugar boost, right? So we couple the sugar with the caffeine. Now, what does the caffeine do? Let me show you how the caffeine affects this, right? Because the caffeine is a diuretic. So the caffeine is going to make you flush water, right? I'm just reading to you out of the book, right? So in your blood, I don't even got enough room. In your blood, right, you have a relationship between sugar and water, right? The less water you have, like, let's say, for instance, let's say you got 20 ounces of water, right? And you put 10 ounces of sugar into 20 ounces of water, right? Now, let's say you drink some coffee. The coffee takes your 20 ounces of water down to 15 ounces of water, right? Without adding any additional sugar, the amount of blood sugar just went up. You understand how that happened? Because your blood sugar is a ratio. It's not exactly like measuring the amount of sugar in the blood. It's measuring the amount of sugar in the blood to the other fluids and all that, right? So you can boost up your blood sugar one of two ways. A, by adding more sugar to the blood, or B, removing water, right? So we give thanks to be able to drink a cup of water every 60 minutes. We give thanks to add water, right? Because the opposite is also true, right? If you have 10 ounces of sugar inside 20 ounces of water, and then you drink another 10 ounces of water, you just reduce the amount of sugar. Without doing any exercise or anything, you just reduce the amount of sugar, because guess what? Now that you got that water in, your body is getting ready to start pushing that sugar to the kidneys and the bladder so you can go pee-pee. Which is why people with diabetes had to pee-pee so much, because their body's trying to get rid of the sugar water, right? And it happens after meals because we eat more protein than we need. And what does your body do with excess protein? Your body doesn't have a way to store it. So when you have excess protein in your body converts that into, drum roll please, sugar. So the blood sugar goes up again, right? And then you got to pee. And you're like, man, how I got to pee so much? I ain't even drink nothing with my food. You eat a whole plate of food, you ain't drink nothing. And you got to go pee 2-3 times. Yeah, because the starch is turning into sugar, the simple carbs turning into sugar, and the meat is turning into sugar. That whole plate, regardless of what you saw, you had mashed potatoes, little rice, that had a little vegetable on the side, little steak, little pork chop, little fried chicken, whatever that was. Yeah, that all turned into sugar at different speeds. The simple carbs turned right into sugar. The complex carbs is taking a little while to turn into sugar. And the meat is going, it's going to take a while to break that down. But right about when the complex carbs is being turned into sugar and finished, then the meat going to start turning into sugar. Yeah. And this is how sedentary lifestyle boosts the fermentation rate. This is how we get back to those type 2B fast twitch muscles, because those muscles are there to get rid of, right? But when you don't have those muscles going, you increase the probability right? Statistics, probability. You increase the probability that you're going to get some cells somewhere that start fermenting energy. Yeah. You ain't got nothing but sugar floating around all over the place anyway, right? Yeah. So anyway, all right. How long have we been going? 3.5 hours? We still got a little bit more. We still got some combo, right? All right. We cooking though. We going through some books, right? We going through some books. We cooking a little bit. A little bit. A little bit of a little bit is a lot. All right. So this is the fixed equation, right? We done went crazy with the fixed equation. Now, remember, I just couldn't help myself. I just couldn't help myself. I couldn't help myself. Right? I couldn't help myself. I had to touch it. How Buster song go? Touch it, flip it, baby. Once you turn it, leave it, stuff formatted. Touch it, flip it, baby. Once you touch it, leave it. So I had to touch it, flip it, right? So I had to bring in boop. Yeah. VO2Max. Shoe times Nefer, right? And then we get the breakdown over here. Light, breath, windpipe, and the id, right? Because when you're dealing with storytelling, what you're doing is you're encoding information. That's the science of biosemiotics, right? Putting information into a picture, right? As much as you can. Information packing, right? Like sphere packing, but information packing, right? So you got Nefer. Nefer represents the windpipe, the id, and yeah. Right? Because we know those are separate things, right? The heart, the flesh, right? And then the id, right? The mind, right? The windpipe representing the lungs, as well as the trachea and the whole extended family, right? So respiration, circulatory system, right? As we unpack the information, right? So your entire respiratory system, your entire circulatory system, shu, the light, and our breath, and the light in our breath, which brings us to my favorite term, right? Right? Chemiluminescence, right? Chemiluminescence, light produced from chemistry, right? Light from chemistry, right? So, I couldn't help myself, right? I had to go backwards. Like, oh, okay, hold up. After I get the whole fixed equation, I'm like, oh, hold up. So diabetes and woo, 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 and cancer and congestive heart failure. And I'm like, now, how would this look 4,000 years ago? How would this look 4,000 years ago?
You know, what would them Africans, how would they encode their information to confuse everybody else? That's what they was putting together. That's what they was about, right? Once they figured out something, they was encoding the information. They was putting self-locks, right? So even if you come in and you invade with the sword, right? Even if you come in with the sword, you still stuck. Because masters of the sword, they ain't spend much time developing the mind. So we're going to sit this thing behind the paywall and you stuck. You ain't going to be able to get to it. And you can't pay with money. You got to pay with time. You got to pay with attention. You got to pay with study. And usually that is opposite to the framework and the mindset of a warrior. Warrior is now. Yeah, my hat is now. I'm going to just take it off you. Yeah. That's the difference between a stick-up kid and a hustler, right? A hustler's going to stand out there, take his risk, and he's going to work hard. Even though it's crime, it's illegal, you think of it however you think of it, but he's going to spend his time and work hard. A stick-up kid is not the same type of person as a hustler, right? Because a hustler would love to be doing whatever they're doing in a legal, totally legitimate fashion, right? The stick-up kid, though, is the live by the sword person. The stick-up kid is going to watch you. He's going to watch the hustler. The stick-up kid is the wolf in the shadows. He's going to watch you working. Yeah, they're going to watch you working. And when you're not really making nothing over there and you just start to do something with that thing, they're going to walk right past you every day. You don't even know. You don't even know. This guy that looked like a geek or a nerd, yeah, this is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Yeah, this is a wolf in sheep's clothing right there. They walking by, they might even stop, talk to you, kick it with you. They might be one of your buddies. They're watching. Oh, that thing go. And then you dumb. You bragging. Like, oh man, look, yeah, look what I just got. I just got the car, the chain, the this, the that. Like, oh, okay. Yeah. The sheep is fat. The sheep has gotten fat. Now it's time to. So you might take 3 months, 6 months, 3 years, 10 years to accumulate wealth, where the stick-up kid is just going to come in and try to get all that in an instant. Yeah, they're going to come in and try to get all that in an instant because they're allergic to work. So when you put information, you encode information, information thieves, people coming in trying to steal the drip. Yeah, take the books. Huh, take the books, huh? Take the books. Yeah. You done ran in and grabbed the books and the papyri and all that, but you don't know what that is. What you gonna do with that? Now you stuck. Like, oh, wait, don't kill them all. We need a few of them alive. Come over here and tell us what this is. Come, translate this to us. Yeah. Translate, make this make sense. What is this here? What does this picture mean? Oh, that's this windpipe. Oh, okay. Yeah, all right, good. Now we know what it means, kill them. It's layers and layers and layers of information there. So when you stop at windpipe, you done missed lungs, respiration, connection to cells, blah, blah, blah. So now you go back and you review it, and it says that the Metu can communicate. You're not thinking what communicate is. Communicate is a transfer of energies, which our body is constantly doing by transferring atoms, molecules, and compounds, right? So anyway, I started talking y'all to death. Let me see here. What else we need to do? All right. So, yeah, we got a vibe. Yeah, we got a vibe here. Yeah, I think we got a vibe. I think we doing good in NeferLand. right? I think the Nefer NeferLand video series is going to be legendary. I don't know if it's a video series. This might be a one-off, right? We might just have to remind folks, go watch the Nefer NeferLand. Or maybe at some point, we might need to create a book of its own, Nefer NeferLand. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Right now, I got to finish up the Eber's prayer. I got to get to Z. I got to get to Z, right? And I kind of had E mapped out. And then somebody went crazy yesterday in the chat, like, no, you got to put erectile dysfunction in there. So, man, I got to figure out how to go erectile dysfunction. But erectile dysfunction, we could have taught erectile dysfunction right off this same board. Yeah. If they don't stop bouncing that ball in this house, oh my goodness. What a blood clot this thing this.